In this video, we're going to take a look at the reflective properties of materials in 3ds Max, and more precisely, we're going to take a look at how to make a material reflective in certain areas and non-reflective in other areas. I got this question recently, and that seems to be something that is not clear for some people. So we're going to take a look at that. So what I've got here is an eternal teapot and a floor under it, and right now the materials that are applied to the floor is, I'm just going to reassign this one to make sure that it's the material. So that's the dark gray material. We don't have any maps in there, and this is just a red standard material for the teapot. So if I render this now, this is what we get: no reflection at all on the floor, and we want to start having reflection in there. To have reflection, very simply, we're going to go into the dark material for the floor, and we're going to go here in reflection. We're going to turn that on, and instead of none here, we're going to put a ray trace map. And the ray trace map has some settings. We're not going to go too much into that. But essentially, when you use it by default, it's going to create a fully reflective material. So I'm going to put that on the side here and render again. And now what we have is a perfectly reflective floor. But what we want is to have some areas that are reflective and some areas that are not. So what we're going to do here, we're going to go back at the top level here, and I'm just going to put a bump map here based on a bitmap, so we can have an idea. And I'm going to use this caustic.gif image. That's actually this one. It's just that has some white areas and some dark areas. I'm going to open this one, go back to the up level, and make sure that the bump is set to 100 so that we can see it in the viewport. All right. So if we render this, this is what we get. We got the bump, and we got some distortion in the reflection. But the idea is that we want to have some areas that are reflective and some areas that are not reflective. So that has nothing to do with the bump, but I just want to be able to see where the bitmap was on the geometry before we start playing with the reflectivity. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to right-click and copy this caustic.gif because I'll need it a bit later. And instead of using a ray trace here, I'm going to click on it. And instead of using a ray trace, we're going to use a mix material. And I'm going to keep the old map as a submap. So what's happening now is the mix material by playing with the mix amount here, if it's set to 0, and actually right now I'm just going to clear that for now. So if it's set to 0, and if I render, it's all dark, so we have no reflection. So if it's all set to 0, that's the color that we see here. So if I set mix amount to 100, actually just put it to 100 here, and I render again, now we're going to have in the reflection channel all white. So that's not what we want. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say if it's 0%, I'm going to make it fully ray trace. I'm just going to use ray trace here. And if it's not reflective, I'm going to put it here to black. So I'm just going to go here and set it to black. So here, if it's to 0%, it's going to be fully reflective, and if it's to 100%, it's going to be black. So let's test that for now. So we render that. So now it's fully reflective. It's at 0%, and if it's at 100%, it is not reflective at all. So that's good. The thing is that now we're adjusting the value, but what we can do is also put a bitmap file or any procedural map that we want to define which areas will be reflective and which area will not be reflective. The thing that's important to remember, and I forgot to mention it, is that reflections are additive, which means that if I don't put black here, I'll have a constant color everywhere on my in the reflection channel, and that's not what I want. I want everything to be black, and the ray trace calculation, everything that will be of a certain color, will be added on top of the actual diffuse channel of the material. So if I want to achieve the effect of reflective in a certain area and non-reflective in another area, I have to make sure that the black area, that the color that is not in the ray trace channel has to be black. So that's just a quick parenthesis there. So I'm going to go here in the mix amount, and instead of using a value, I'm going to go here and select a bitmap, and I'm going to select exactly the same one, caustic.gif, and I'm going to open this one. And now it's the mask definition or the mix definition for which one is going to be used in different areas of the map. So if I render this now, what you'll see is that you've got certain areas that are reflective and certain areas that are not reflective. So here you see that it's not reflective at all, and here it's fully reflective. We can invert that if we want to. So by going onto the caustic.gif definition here, we've got all the settings for the bitmap, and we can go into the output. And actually, I'm going to maximize that so we can see. I'm going to close this down, and we go here in the output section, and we can invert that image. So if we invert that and render again, it's going to be exactly the opposite. So that some areas will be reflective and some other areas will not be reflective. It's a black and white channel that defines here which one will be ray trace and which one will be completely dark. So that's one method of use of having this type of definition. You just go in reflection. Instead of putting a ray trace directly in there, you just go and apply a mix material. You define your mask in the mix amount here, and you define your ray trace in the first slot or in the second, depending on what you want. It's either one or the other, and the other one has to be black. So that's one way of working. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close this down. I'm going to use a totally different material, and I'm going to assign it to the floor. And instead of using a standard material, I'm going to go here and define a DGS material for diffuse, glossy, and specular. So what I'm going to do here is that the shiny level here, if I set it to 0, I'm going to render this, it's not reflective at all. If I set it to maybe 10, and I render again, what you'll get is diffuse reflection. If I increase it a bit more, maybe 20, you'll see that the reflection are getting a bit more precise. If I bring it to 100, then you'll see that reflection will be fully precise. And the higher the value, the more precise the reflections are. And this is now using a constant value, but you can also use a bitmap. So exactly the same idea as before. If I grab the bitmap here, and I use the caustic.gif, if I render this now, you'll see that actually it's a very dark texture, so I'm going to bring the output here to maybe something around 11. So I tested it before. It's around that area. So now you can see that in certain areas where it was white in the bitmap, you get some very precise reflection, and in other areas it's a blurred reflection. So if you want to do the effect where something is not reflective at all in certain area, you just put a completely black color. If it's fully reflective, you put a white color, but everything in between, all the shades of gray, will be variation of the blur of the reflection. So if you want to do some kind of effect where the mirror is has blurred reflection, but at the center it's a fully precise reflection, you can use again a bitmap, or just paint in the vertex color channel, or use a procedural map to define certain areas that will be precisely reflective and the other that will be blurred reflection. So that's how you can create materials that have various level of reflection in 3ds Max.